The key card clicked green, and I pushed the door open. She was already there, sitting on the edge of the king bed with her boots off and her reading glasses on. A stack of project drawings spread across the white duvet, like she'd been working for an hour. Maeve Kowalczyk looked up. They only had the one room. She said it the way she said everything, flat, precise, leaving no room for debate. I called down to the desk when they told me, "You can have the left side. The thermostat's broken. It runs warm." Then she looked back down at her drawings. My ears went hot before anything else did. My name is Ethan Rourke. I am 37 years old, and for 6 years I have worked as a senior structural engineer at Caldwell & Morrow, a mid-size firm on Adelaide Street West in downtown Toronto. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in the annex, on the second floor, an old semi that has radiators that clank through every February like they're personally offended by winter. I have been divorced for 2 years. There are no children. My ex-wife's name is Ingrid. She was an architect, still is. She left Caldwell & Morrow 3 months before I signed the papers and took a principal position at Brennan Associates, a firm across town that does mostly commercial work and has a habit of underbidding everything we pitch. Ingrid called me careful the night she left. She meant it as an insult. I have since decided it wasn't one. In the left breast pocket of every shirt I own, I carry a Staedtler Mars 780 mechanical pencil. It's a 2mm lead holder, brushed aluminum, about the length of a finger, worn smooth at the grip from 30 years of use before it ever came to me. It was my father's. He was a structural engineer in Hamilton in the 1980s, worked mostly on bridges and parkades. Gone the spring I turned 28. He kept the pencil in his chest pocket so he could pull it out and sketch on whatever surface was nearby. A coffee shop napkin, the back of a receipt, the corner of a newspaper. He used to say a good idea doesn't wait for paper. The pencil lives in the same pocket now, over my heart, because that is where he kept it. At Caldwell & Morrow, the project managers call me the steady hand. I am the one they call in when a load calculation in question or a foundation spec needs defending before a city engineer. My best friend at the office is Felix Arsenault, a mechanical engineer from Sudbury who has opinions about everything and keeps a bag of ketchup chips in his desk that he offers to no one and defends fiercely. And then there is Maeve Kowalczyk. Maeve is 32, a principal architect. She joined the firm 2 years ago from a studio in Montreal, and in 2 years she has flagged, revised, or flat-out rejected more of my structural drawings than every other architect at the firm combined. Not incorrectly. That is what makes it worse. Every change she marks in red has a reason, and the reason is usually right, and I have never once been able to dismiss her without thinking about it first. The project team calls us the correction loop. Felix once put $10 on the break room whiteboard, predicting we'd either transfer or be married before the end of the fiscal year. The money is still up there. The retreat was mandatory. 3 days at the Birchwood, a resort on Lake Rousseau in Muskoka, 4 hours north of the city if you stop at the Tim's and Barrie, which Felix always does. The same weekend, the resort was hosting an industry mixer for a group of Ontario firms, and Brennan Associates was one of the sponsors. I knew that before I got in the carpool. I got in the carpool anyway. Felix drove. He ate an entire bag of all-dressed chips before we hit the 400. He looked at me in the rear view at some point north of Barrie with an expression like a man bracing for weather. "Rourke, you and Kowalczyk are going to end up in the same breakout group, and I'm going to need compensation for the emotional labor of watching that." I told him we'd be fine. He made a noise that was not agreement. The birchwood smelled like pine and wood smoke the second you walked through the doors. High ceilings, exposed timber, the kind of place that charges $400 a night and earns most of it. The woman at the front desk found my reservation, frowned, typed something, frowned again. "Mr. Rourke, I'm so sorry. There's been an error on our end. We've double-booked your room. The only accommodation we have available is a suite already assigned to a Ms. Kowalczyk. I can call up and explain the situation if you'd like." I told her to go ahead. She dialed, it rang twice. Then her expression shifted to something between impressed and uncertain. "Oh, of course, yes, thank you." She hung up and printed a key card and handed it across the desk. She said it's fine. I rode the elevator alone. Second floor. The hallway was quiet, birch panel walls, carpet that swallowed every step. Room 214. I stood outside it for longer than I needed to, my thumb resting on the pencil in my pocket the way it always does when I am working out a problem I don't have enough information to solve yet. Then I tapped the card and went in. She didn't look surprised to see me. That was the part I couldn't account for on the drive up. She looked like a woman who had considered all available scenarios and chosen this one. The first night passed in a series of small, almost imperceptible adjustments. I offered to take the pull-out sofa. She told me not to be ridiculous. The suite was 360 square feet. The bed was a king, and she'd shared smaller spaces with noisier people on field visits. She said it without looking up from the drawings she'd spread across the duvet, and she said it in the same measured, neutral tone she used in every structural review meeting. I took that to mean she was unbothered. I wasn't sure I was. She mentioned at some point that the drive up had given her a headache, and I didn't think about it. I just went to the small kettle in the corner and found a chamomile tea bag in the amenity basket and put the water on and set the mug on her side of the nightstand without saying anything about it. She looked at the mug for a moment, then she set down her pencil. "Thank you, Ethan." Not Rourke, Ethan. In 2 years of structural reviews and specification disputes and 2 separate occasions where we'd argued in front of the project director about stairwell clearances, she had never once called me by my first name. I let it sit there in the room between us and didn't comment on it because commenting on it would have made her aware of it, and I got the sense, from the careful way she'd turned back to her drawings, that she already was. Before I turned off the lamp, I took the Stedler out of my pocket and set it on the nightstand next to the clock. It felt strange to do it in front of someone. At home I set it there every night, but home was the only place I'd ever done it. Her eyes moved to it almost immediately. "That's not a sight pencil." "No," I said. "Nobody carries a 780 like that unless it means something." I told her. Short version, my father, Hamilton, the Bridges, the spring I turned 28. She held very still through all of it, not politely still, but the way someone goes still when they are actually listening, which is different and rarer than it should be. She said quietly, "He sounds like someone who left things in good order." I almost asked her something back. By the time I found the right question, she had already reached over and clicked off her light. The next morning we were put in the same workshop group. In 2 years, being put in the same group had meant a slight disagreement by the end of the first exercise. That morning she pulled the chair out beside me, not across from me, and when the facilitator asked us to develop a structural concept for a hypothetical mixed-use building, she slid the brief across to me first and sat with her arms folded, watching, only speaking when I was about to make an assumption she had a better answer for. And when she spoke, her voice was lower than it was in meetings, slower. None of the precision was gone, but the edge was somewhere else. Felix passed by our table, stopped walking, looked at us for a full 4 seconds and walked away without a word. At lunch he cornered me at the buffet. He was holding a plate that was structurally unsound. "Rourke, full morning, 0 markups, nobody raised their voice. Are you 2 medicated? Is this a resort thing?" I said we were just working. Felix said, "That's what my brother said about his business partner. He married her in 2021. I laughed, and Maeve, who was standing 2 meters behind him with a coffee, laughed into the back of her hand. Felix heard it. He did not turn around. That took more restraint than I expected from him. The afternoon session was called Design Accountability. We were paired off and asked to describe a professional decision we regretted and what it had cost us. Maeve talked about a junior designer she'd mentored at her Montreal studio, a young woman named Zara, who had presented her first concept independently at a client review and been dismantled, in precise and unkind terms, by a senior partner who didn't like being challenged by people he'd underestimated. Maeve described it the way you describe something you've replayed too many times, with the specific, worn-down clarity of a memory you've handled until all the rough edges are smooth. "I should have stopped him," she said. "I had standing, I didn't use it, someone else did." She paused. "I've never forgotten that." I asked who stepped in. She changed the subject with a grace I only recognized later as practice. We had an hour before dinner. She asked if I wanted to walk the trail along the water. In 2 years, neither of us had ever asked the other for anything that wasn't project-related. I said yes. We walked for 20 minutes through a birch corridor above the lake, the afternoon light coming in flat and gold from the west, the kind of October afternoon that makes you want to be nowhere else in the country. She was quiet for most of it. Then she said without preamble, "Why do you always concede the last word in a client meeting, even when you're right?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. Because someone let me have the last word when I was junior, and it mattered more than anything else he said in the whole meeting. He didn't have to do that. She was quiet for a while after that, the heavy kind of quiet, the kind that has weight in it. Who was it? My dad. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the walk. We turned around and came back the way we'd come, and neither of us spoke, and it was the most comfortable silence I'd had with another person in 2 years. Dinner was at the resort's main dining room. 10 of us at a long table, Felix wedged between 2 project managers who kept debating procurement timelines. The server came around. Maeve waved off the menu. "He'll have a Collective Arts amber bottle if you have it." The server nodded and wrote it down. I looked at her. She looked at the server. Felix stopped chewing. Then he started again very slowly, staring at me with an expression I will not attempt to describe. "Kowalczyk," he said carefully. "You know his drink." She said with perfect composure, "I work 12 meters from the man." Back in the suite that night, she opened her notebook at the desk. A small dark brown leather book with an elastic strap. She set it flat and uncapped her drafting liner and made notes in the neat economic shorthand architects use, every line tight and precise. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and took out a mechanical pencil. I was at the sink and I saw it in the mirror. A Stedler Mars 780, same brushed aluminium, same 2mm lead. Same pencil. I said, keeping my voice level, "Nice pencil." "Old habit," she said without looking up. "Where did you get it?" She was quiet for one beat, half a second, the kind of half second you remember for the rest of your life. "A drafting supply shop years ago." She did not say which shop, she did not say which city, her hand resting on the open notebook did not move. We split the bed that second night. She lay with her back half turned, and I lay on my side facing the window, and between us was 30 centimeters of white sheet and 2 years of every conversation we'd had about load paths and cantilever limits and stairwell clearances, all of it suddenly feeling like it had been about something neither of us had ever named. On the nightstand, 10 centimeters apart, our 2 pencils sat side by side, hers on the cover of her notebook, mine on the small glass coaster, both catching the same low light coming in off the lake. Sometime past midnight, when she must have thought I was asleep, she said very quietly to the ceiling or to herself, "You always make it look like you're not paying attention. But you don't miss anything, do you?" It wasn't a question. I lay still and did not answer. I listened to the heating vent and watched the light from the lake move on the ceiling, and thought about every red markup she had ever put on my drawings, and something shifted in my understanding of what all that red had meant. Ingrid walked out of the elevator near the conference wing the next morning, like a woman who had never not been there. I'd had 10 minutes alone before Maeve came down. I was at the coffee station in the lobby when I heard her voice behind me. Ethan, the way she always said it, contained, smiling, in control of the room even when the room only had 2 people. "Muskoka in October, you haven't changed." She was wearing a blazer I didn't recognize. Her coffee was a large oat latte from the resort cafe. Brennan Associates was one of the industry mixer sponsors. I had known that before the carpool. I'd gotten in anyway. She asked about my mother. She asked about the annex apartment. She asked whether I was still at Caldwell and Morrow, still in the same building, still in the same role. She said with a warmth so precisely calibrated, it took me a moment to feel it land. "Stability is important to you, isn't it? I always admired that about you." Maeve stepped off the elevator just then, saw us and walked past without altering her pace. Ingrid watched her go. She watched her too long and too professionally. Then she said, "She's very competent looking. Does she know?" "Know what?" Ingrid's expression was careful and exact, "That you don't let people in. Not all the way." I said something polite. She touched my arm briefly and moved toward the conference wing. At lunch, Felix sat across from me at an outdoor table with his burger and a face like a man doing math. That was Ingrid at the coffee station. "Yes." "You okay?" "Yes." He set down his fork. "Rourke, try it once, say no." I laughed. "I didn't say no. I have carried that as a small failure ever since." The afternoon mixer was on the resort's terrace. Edison bulbs over the water, wine service, the industry firms mingling in that practiced, competitive way that looks like socializing and isn't. I was standing with a partner from an Ottawa firm who was explaining passive house standards to me at a volume that suggested he wasn't interested in what I already knew. I was not there for what happened next. I found out that evening from Felix, who had been close enough to see. Ingrid had found Maeve at the edge of the terrace, introduced herself, shook hands, the right amount of warmth, the right amount of distance, said she'd heard the name, that Ethan had mentioned her, which he hadn't, but Maeve had no way to know that. Then Ingrid said, in the tone she used when she wanted a room to lean in, that Ethan was one of those people who seemed open because he was quiet. But that quiet wasn't the same as available, and she hoped Maeve knew that, for her own sake, because she was clearly talented and talented people deserved someone who could actually meet them halfway. Maeve said something back. She wouldn't tell me what. Then she left through the side door, near the dock, and didn't come back through the main terrace. I came upstairs at 5:45. She was standing at the window with her back to the room, her shoulders set in the way shoulders set when someone is working very hard to hold something in place. I'm going to take the pull-out tonight. I have a headache. Her voice was like a door with the latch turned. I asked what had happened. She said nothing. She said it exactly the way I always say it to Felix. She didn't come down to dinner. I sat with Felix and ate without tasting anything. Halfway through he leaned over quietly. Ingrid talked to her at the mixer. 6, maybe 8 minutes. I was 20 feet away. I set my fork down. Everything from that point until morning felt like it was happening at a half-second delay. When I came upstairs, she was already on the pull-out with her back to the room and the blanket pulled to her shoulder. On the desk, her Stedler had been moved, set back to her side of the workspace, zipped into the pocket of her drafting roll, kept, sealed, put away. My pencil sat where I'd left it on the nightstand. The two of them, no longer anywhere near each other. At breakfast the next morning, Felix texted me from across the room rather than walking over. Whatever Ingrid told her, it isn't true. You know that. Go fix it. Maeve sat by the window alone, coffee untouched, eating half a piece of toast. In 2 years of structural reviews I had never seen her this quiet. In 2 years of careful, precise, bar disagreements I had never once thought of her as someone who could be afraid. I thought about it now and could not unfind it. The final workshop that morning she was precise and professional and completely somewhere else. The sharpness was there but it was empty, running on procedure, not on anything real. Felix kicked me under the table hard enough to leave a mark. Later at the coffee station, Ingrid found me one last time. She looked at the pocket of my shirt. You still carry his pencil? Yes. Some things really don't change. The same measured smile. That always was the truest thing about you, Ethan. She walked away, and I understood for the first time that she had come to Muskoka, knowing exactly what she was going to do, had done it carefully, and on schedule. Maeve said one thing to me that afternoon, by the window, when the light was going flat, and the room was almost dark. Rourke, if I ever pushed back hard in a review, it was because I could. Not everything I've done in a room with you was purely professional. I didn't have time to ask her what she meant. She had already reached for her jacket. I lay on the king bed that night listening to her breathe on the pull-out across the room, watching the shadows of the birch trees move against the curtains, and I thought about 2 years of every red markup on my drawings. I had thought they were corrections. That night I began to understand they might have also been something else entirely. The only language she had decided was safe enough to use. I found her the next morning on the dock behind the resort. Last day, checkout in 4 hours. She was sitting at the far end with her feet just above the water, the October light hitting the lake at a low angle that made everything look like it was made of something more permanent than it was. No boats out, no one else on the dock. I walked the length of the planks and sat down 2 boards away, and she didn't move. I told her about Ingrid. Everything. The 4 years of marriage, the year of arguments before it, the night she left for Brennan Associates, and the things she had said the night before she filed, that I was too careful to love anything fully. I told her about the last 6 months of the marriage, when Ingrid had told me she was pregnant, and I had rearranged everything in my head to accommodate that future, and then discovered through my lawyer, 3 months after the divorce was final, that the pregnancy had never been confirmed by anyone but Ingrid, that the medical records she'd referenced in our final argument did not exist, that the only documented appointment was a cancellation. There was no child, Maeve. There was an exit strategy. That is the whole story. I stopped talking. The lake moved. A loon called from somewhere north of us. She was looking down at the water. After a long moment, her shoulders dropped about half a centimeter. I only caught it because I had apparently been tracking the precise position of her shoulders, without meaning to, for 2 years. She spoke without looking up. Toronto Reference Library, Design and Architecture Section, 3rd floor. There's a symposium they run every spring for emerging designers. Regional firms send representatives. 2.5 years ago, a senior partner from a Vancouver firm spent 15 minutes publicly dismantling a presentation by a young designer named Zara, a third-year student on placement. She was 22 years old. She stopped breathing in front of a room full of people. She finally looked at me. And someone in the 3rd row cut in, calm, no theatrics, turned the whole critique inside out until Zara could breathe again, then sat back down and said nothing else. I didn't speak. I saw the pencil in your pocket when you leaned forward to point at her slide. I recognized the model. My father had one. She paused. He was a civil engineer in Winnipeg. He's been gone since I was 24. The lake made a small sound against the dock pilings. She opened the inside pocket of her drafting roll and took out the Stedler and held it up in the last of the afternoon light. I bought this 3 weeks after the symposium, a drafting supply shop on Queen Street West. It's closed now. The woman who ran it found one in old stock. I didn't even need it. I had liners that worked fine. I just wanted something that reminded me that someone in a room could decide to do that. Just cut in. She set it down on the planks between us. The low sun caught the aluminium exactly the way it caught mine. I applied to Caldwell and Morrow 2 months later. I told myself it was for the work. I didn't say anything. I was going backward through 2 years of moments, every red markup, every chair pulled beside me instead of across from me, every drink ordered before I could open the menu, 2 years of things I had filed under professional and left there without looking again. She kept going. By the time I had the job and realized you weren't with Ingrid anymore, the armor was already built, the technical distance, the correction loop. It was the only structure I trusted. She looked at the 2 pencils on the cedar planks. Every time I flagged one of your drawings, Ethan, I was buying myself another week in the same room as you without having to answer for it. I reached forward and picked up her pencil, turned it once between my fingers and set it back down beside mine. 2 brushed aluminium barrels side by side on old cedar, both catching the same late light. Then let's stop billing time we're not spending, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she laughed, an actual laugh, not the careful professional version. The dock held the sound for a second before it went out over the water. On the walk back in the dark, she said, "You know the worst part, Rourke. Every time you let me have the last word in a markup meeting, I thought you were being diplomatic." I said, "I was listening." She was quiet a moment. Nobody had ever listened like that before. I didn't have an answer good enough for that. I didn't try to make one. We drove back to Toronto on Sunday. Felix took the 400 south. He turned up the radio somewhere around Barrie and did not turn it back down. The next Monday at 7:40 in the morning, I walked into the coffee shop on Adelaide, at the corner we'd passed every day for 2 years without going into, and she was already at the corner table with 2 cups. My coffee had the right amount of sugar. We sat across from each other for 9 minutes without speaking. It was the quietest 9 minutes I'd had in recent memory. Felix walked in at minute 10, stopped when he saw us, backed out through the door, and sent me a text with 2 words. Finally, obviously. We built our rituals without announcing them. The night before every significant presentation of hers, I left my father's pencil on her desk, laid parallel to her notebook. She never used it, she just kept it there while she worked. The next morning it would be back on my desk beside my keyboard. Neither of us ever mentioned it. Felix noticed within a week. Felix, remarkably, never said a word. 6 weeks after Muskoka, a firm in Calgary offered Maeve a director of design position, 45% raise, corner office, a team of 8. She turned it down in 2 days. I found out from Felix at the espresso machine on a Thursday morning. She turned down a Calgary director role, he said. You might want to ask her why. I asked her that night at my apartment. She was at the counter pouring wine and she said without turning around, "Not yet. Not from here." I walked over and stood beside her and put my hand over hers on the counter and felt her exhale change under my palm, something releasing that had been held a long time. She didn't move her hand. She poured the second glass. That was the first time I touched her on purpose. It was not a movie moment. She kept pouring, but she leaned back into my hand by about 2 centimeters, and that was the answer. 1 year after Muskoka, our whole team went back. Same resort, same October. Maeve walked up to the front desk and the clerk, a young man named Luca this time, who had clearly been briefed, smiled and printed one key card. Room 214. We went down to the dock in the last light of the afternoon, and she reached into her drafting roll and I reached into my shirt pocket, and she laid our 2 pencils side by side on the cedar planks, the same way I had laid them down the first time. "For the record," she said, and that was where I kissed her. 13 months of not wasting time, neither of us in a hurry. At the 2-year mark on the same dock at almost the same hour of dusk, I asked her to marry me. I didn't kneel. She would have called that structural overkill. I handed her a small ring box and she opened it and said, dry as always, "Did you calculate the load on this?" Then she laughed and handed me her Stedler so I could sign the dinner receipt that night. It is a joke that will only ever belong to the 2 of us. The wedding was in my mother's backyard in Hamilton, 28 people, a September afternoon that was warm enough to keep the doors open. Felix was best man and his toast was 3 minutes long and ended in a sound he described incorrectly as allergies. Zara flew in from Vancouver. Maeve had sent her an invitation quietly and told no one. Zara sat in the second row, and at some point during the ceremony I saw her reach into her handbag and press her fingers against something inside it. Afterward, she showed me a small lined notebook, the first one Maeve had ever given her to carry on site. She'd kept it ever since. I wore my father's pencil in the left breast pocket of my suit. Maeve carried hers in a small interior pocket sewn into the lining of her dress. We signed the marriage certificate with 2 different pencils, both of them the same model, both of them 2 millimeters, both of them worn smooth in the same places by 2 different sets of hands. On the shared desk in our new office on Adelaide Street, 2 Stedler Mars 780s live together in a glass cup. Anyone who comes in thinks they are just drafting pencils. Only the 2 of us know they are 2 roads that spent 2 years running parallel, correcting each other's work, calling it professional. Zara is a project lead in Vancouver now. She visits Toronto every spring for the symposium. She always gets lunch with both of us, and she always asks me the same question. "Do you remember what you said in the 3rd row?" I always tell her I don't. She always laughs. Neither do I just remember that someone did. I am writing this from the desk on Adelaide on a Tuesday evening in October. Maeve left an hour ago. The building is quiet. In the glass cup in front of me, 2 pencils. I picked up my father's a moment ago, turned it once and set it back. Some people walk into your life with both hands open and you know exactly what they are from the first moment. And some people walk in and mark up every drawing you've ever made and call it quality control. And you spend 2 years thinking they are the hardest part of your work. And then a door opens at a resort in Muskoka and they are already there, sitting on the edge of the bed with their boots off, and something in the room is different. And you cannot put words to it until you are standing on a dock in the last light, finally putting words to everything. Ingrid once told me I was too careful to love anything fully. I have thought about that a lot in the years since. She wasn't wrong about the careful part. She just didn't know what I was being careful with. There is a kind of love that announces itself, and there is a kind of love that shows up in 2 years of red markups and a pencil bought from a closed shop on Queen Street West and a cup of chamomile tea set on the right side of a nightstand without being asked. And if you are patient enough and quiet enough and the hotel booking system makes exactly the right mistake at exactly the right time, you might get to sit on a dock at dusk and watch that love finally say its own name. So, 2 things before you go. Is there someone in your life who has been correcting your work for longer than makes professional sense? And if you had been standing outside room 214 that night, keycard in hand, knowing who was on the other side, would you have gone in, or would you have gone back downstairs and asked for a cot? If this reached you somewhere real, leave a like so I know you were here at the end. Subscribe for more stories, slow ones, Honest ones, one each week, and in the comments, tell me about someone who stayed close by making things difficult. I want to know I'm not the only one who almost missed it.